Good evening, everyone. I want to talk to you about something that's counterintuitive, something that may make you uncomfortable. But I promise you, it's also something that will set you free. It's time to disappear. Perfection is an illusion that many of us chase, often without realizing how much it costs us. From a young age, we are taught to strive for excellence, to aim for straight A's, to win the awards, and to achieve success in ways that are visible and measurable. Over time, this pursuit of excellence morphs into something far more insidious, a relentless pressure to be perfect. We convince ourselves that if we can just get it all right, our careers, our relationships, our bodies, our parenting, then we will finally feel worthy, loved, and enough. But here's the hard truth: perfection is a lie. It's not just unattainable, it's unsustainable. It doesn't lead to joy or fulfillment. Instead, it leads to exhaustion, disconnection, and ironically, a profound sense of inadequacy. Perfection doesn't leave room for humanity. To be human is to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to stumble and fall. But perfectionism doesn't allow for any of that. It demands that we hide our flaws, suppress our struggles, and present a polished version of ourselves to the world. The problem is, this version of ourselves is not real. It's a mask we wear to fit into a culture that glorifies achievement and appearance over authenticity and connection. And the more we strive to meet these impossible standards, the more we lose touch with who we really are. This pressure to be perfect seeps into every corner of our lives. At work, it might look like overachieving to prove our worth. At home, it might manifest as the constant effort to be the perfect parent, partner, or friend. On social media, it's curating the perfect feed, capturing the highlights while cropping out the mess. In our personal lives, it's the fear of vulnerability, the refusal to let anyone see the cracks in our armor. We carry this weight with us every day, believing that if we can just hold it all together, we'll finally feel at peace. But peace never comes because perfection is an ever-moving target. What's worse is that perfectionism is deeply tied to shame. When we fall short of the unrealistic expectations we set for ourselves or that we feel others have set for us, we don't just feel disappointed. We feel unworthy. We tell ourselves stories like, "I'm not good enough," or "I'll never measure up." These stories are rooted in shame, the belief that our flaws make us unlovable. And so the cycle continues. We strive harder, push further, all in an attempt to silence the voice of shame. But shame doesn't go away when we chase perfection. It only grows louder. Breaking free from this cycle starts with a radical act, choosing to let go of the need to be perfect. This doesn't mean settling for mediocrity or abandoning our goals. It means redefining success. It means shifting our focus from how can I appear perfect to how can I show up as my true self. It means allowing ourselves to be seen in all our messy, beautiful, flawed glory. And yes, this is terrifying. Vulnerability always is. But it's also liberating. When we stop striving for perfection, we make room for something far more meaningful: authenticity. Authenticity is not about being perfect, it's about being real. It's about acknowledging our struggles and imperfections, not as weaknesses, but as part of what makes us human. It's about showing up even when we feel like we don't have it all together. Because the truth is, nobody does. We're all just figuring it out as we go. And when we give ourselves permission to be imperfect, we create space for others to do the same. This is where connection happens. This is where empathy is born. Letting go of perfection is not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice, a commitment to choose courage over comfort, authenticity over approval. It's choosing to believe that our worthiness is not something we have to earn or prove. It's something we already have, simply because we are human. So the next time you feel the weight of perfection pressing down on you, remember this: you don't have to carry it. Put it down. Step into the freedom of imperfection. It's here in this space that you'll find the peace and connection you've been searching for all along. The need for approval is one of the most deeply ingrained human desires. From the moment we are born, we look to others for validation: parents, teachers, friends, and society at large. Approval feels like acceptance, like belonging, like love. It feels good to be told we're doing well, that we're enough, that we're seen and valued. And there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be liked or appreciated. But when the need for approval becomes the lens through which we view our worth, it can trap us in a cycle of self-doubt and inauthenticity. Seeking approval often starts innocently. As children, we learn to associate praise with being good. We're told to behave, to follow rules, to achieve. And when we do, we're rewarded with smiles, words of encouragement, or recognition. Over time, this shapes our understanding of self-worth. We begin to equate external validation with our value as individuals. By the time we're adults, many of us are carrying this unconscious belief: if others approve of me, I'm worthy. If they don't, I'm not. This mindset can be exhausting and damaging, leading us to prioritize the expectations of others over our own needs, desires, and authenticity. When we live for approval, we give away our power. We hand over control of our self-worth to people who may not truly see or understand us. It's like running on a treadmill where the speed and incline are set by someone else. We exhaust ourselves trying to meet the expectations of others, all the while moving further away from who we really are. Whether it's the way we dress, the career we choose, the relationships we stay in, or the way we spend our time, our decisions become guided by what we think will make others happy rather than what feels right for us. And the truth is, even when we receive approval, it often feels fleeting. We're left chasing the next compliment, the next nod of acceptance, like an endless pursuit with no finish line. The need for approval also keeps us from being fully authentic. When we prioritize how others perceive us, we often edit ourselves. We downplay our quirks, hide our vulnerabilities, and conform to what we think others want us to be. This creates a disconnect between who we are and how we show up in the world. It's as though we're wearing a mask, one that might win us approval but ultimately leaves us feeling unseen and misunderstood. The irony is, the more we chase approval, the less authentic we become, and the less satisfying that approval feels because it's not based on our true selves. Breaking free from the need for approval begins with recognizing where this pattern shows up in our lives. Ask yourself, how often do you say yes to something because you're afraid of disappointing someone? How often do you stay quiet when you want to speak up, out of fear of judgment? How often do you make choices based on what you think others expect, rather than what feels true to you? Awareness is the first step toward change. Once we see the ways in which we're seeking approval, we can begin to challenge those patterns. Letting go of the need for approval doesn't mean we stop caring about others or their opinions. It means we stop relying on those opinions to define our worth. It means shifting from external validation to internal validation to internal validation. Instead of asking, what will they think of me, we start asking, what do I think of me? Instead of seeking praise from others, we learn to celebrate ourselves. This shift requires courage. It requires trusting that our worth is not something that needs to be earned, it's something that already exists, independent of what anyone else thinks. This isn't easy work. For many of us, the need for approval is deeply rooted in our sense of identity. But as we begin to let go of this need, we create space for something far more fulfilling: authenticity. When we stop performing for others, we can start living for ourselves. We can make choices that align with our values and passions rather than someone else's expectations. We can show up as our true selves, unapologetically. And in doing so, we invite deeper connections with others, relationships based not on performance, but on mutual respect and understanding. There's a freedom that comes with releasing the need for approval. It's the freedom to be imperfect, to take risks, to stand in your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. It's the freedom to know that you are enough, just as you are, regardless of what anyone else thinks. And in that freedom, you'll find a sense of peace and confidence that no amount of external validation could ever provide. Shame is one of the most powerful and debilitating emotions we experience as human beings. It creeps into our lives quietly, whispering lies about who we are and what we're worth. It tells us that we're not good enough, that we don't belong, and that there's something fundamentally flawed about us. Shame thrives in secrecy, growing stronger the longer we keep it hidden. And when left unchecked, it shapes the way we see ourselves, the choices we make, and the connections we build. Disappearing from the stories of shame doesn't mean pretending shame doesn't exist. It means confronting it, understanding it, and choosing to let go of the narratives that no longer serve us. Shame often stems from our most vulnerable experiences, moments of failure, rejection, or betrayal. It might come from childhood, where a critical parent or teacher made us feel like we weren't enough. It might come from societal expectations, where we've been judged for how we look, what we believe, or the paths we've chosen. Wherever it begins, shame plants seeds of doubt that grow into stories we carry with us. These stories sound like, I'm not smart enough, I'll never be successful, I'm unlovable, or I'm broken. They aren't true, but they feel true because shame is so deeply tied to our sense of identity. The problem with shame is that it isolates us. It convinces us that we're alone in our struggles, that everyone else has it figured out while we're failing. We put up walls to protect ourselves, thinking that if we hide our shame, we'll be safe. But those walls don't keep us safe, they keep us disconnected. Shame thrives in the dark, in the spaces where we silence our voices and hide our truths. The more we avoid it, the more power it has over us. To disappear from the stories of shame, we have to do something radical. We have to bring them into the light. This begins with acknowledging the shame we feel, naming it, saying, I feel ashamed, because might feel terrifying, but it's the first step in taking away its power. Shame hates to be spoken aloud, because when we name it, we take control of it. We begin to see it for what it is: a story, not a fact. And here's the truth: you are not your shame. The things you've done or experienced do not define you. Once we've named our shame, the next step is to challenge the stories it tells. Ask yourself, is this story true? Is it based on facts or is it based on fear? Often we find that the stories of shame are rooted in unrealistic expectations or societal pressures. They tell us we should be perfect, successful, or always in control, and when we're not, we feel inadequate. But here's the thing, nobody is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has moments of vulnerability. When we recognize that our shame stories are built on false premises, we can begin to rewrite them. Another powerful way to combat shame is through connection. Shame tells us to hide, but healing comes from reaching out. Sharing our struggles with someone we trust can be transformative. When we open up to others, we often find that they've experienced similar feelings. This shared vulnerability creates empathy and understanding, reminding us that we're not alone. The act of being seen and accepted, flaws and all, is one of the most healing experiences we can have. It reminds us that we are worthy of love and belonging, even in our messiest moments. Letting go of shame also requires self-compassion. Too often, we are our own harshest critics, replaying our mistakes and flaws in an endless loop. But what if we spoke to ourselves the way we would a friend? What if we offered ourselves kindness and forgiveness instead of judgment? Self-compassion is not about excusing our mistakes, it's about recognizing that we're human. We're allowed to fail, to struggle, to grow. When we treat ourselves with gentleness, we weaken the grip of shame and open the door to healing. Disappearing from the stories of shame is not an overnight process. It's a journey of courage and vulnerability, of choosing to confront the lies shame tells us and replace them with truth. It's about recognizing that our worth is not determined by what we've done or what's been done to us. We are worthy simply because we are. And as we let go of shame, we create space for something far more powerful: self-acceptance, connection, and the freedom to live authentically. In that freedom, we find not just healing, but the ability to fully embrace the beauty of who we are. The desire for control is a natural human instinct. It stems from a deep-seated need for safety, predictability, and assurance. We tell ourselves that if we can just control every aspect of our lives, our relationships, our careers, our image, even the future, then we can avoid pain, failure, or disappointment. This belief promises us a sense of security, but in reality, it often leaves us feeling exhausted, anxious, and frustrated. The truth is, control is an illusion. Life is inherently unpredictable, messy, and full of surprises. And while this lack of certainty can feel terrifying, it also holds the key to freedom and growth. Trying to control everything is like holding tightly to a handful of sand. The harder you grip, the faster it slips through your fingers. The more we try to micromanage every detail, the more we realize how much is beyond our grasp. Despite our best efforts, we cannot control other people's thoughts, actions, or feelings. We cannot control every outcome or ensure that things will go exactly as planned. What we can control is limited our choices, our attitudes, our responses, and yet we expend so much energy trying to dominate the uncontrollable. The need for control often arises from fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of uncertainty. We believe that if we can control the situation, we can avoid these fears. But in trying to control everything, we also limit ourselves. We become rigid, clinging to plans and expectations that may no longer serve us. We miss out on opportunities for spontaneity, creativity, and connection because we are so focused on making things go just right. The irony is that in our quest for control, we often create the very stress and chaos we're trying to avoid. This is particularly true in relationships. When we feel the need to control others, whether it's a partner, friend, or family member, we inadvertently push them away. Control comes from a place of insecurity, of wanting to shape someone else's behavior to meet our expectations or ease our discomfort. But relationships thrive on trust and autonomy, not on manipulation or micromanagement. When we let go of the need to control others, we allow space for genuine connection and mutual respect. We learn to accept people as they are, not as we wish they would be. Letting go of control doesn't mean giving up or being passive. It's not about neglecting responsibilities or abandoning goals. It's about recognizing the difference between what you can influence and what you cannot. It's about focusing your energy on what truly matters: your values, your growth, your well-being, and releasing the rest. This shift requires a mindset of trust in yourself, trust in others, and trust in the process of life. Trust doesn't guarantee that everything will work out perfectly, but it allows you to move forward with courage and resilience, even in the face of uncertainty. One of the most powerful tools for letting go of control is mindfulness. When we practice being present in the moment, we become more aware of our tendency to overthink and overmanage. Mindfulness teaches us to accept what is, rather than resisting it or trying to force it to change. It helps us approach challenges with curiosity instead of fear, and it reminds us that we don't have to have all the answers right now. In the present moment, we find the freedom to breathe, to pause, and to trust that things will unfold as they're meant to. Letting go of control also means embracing vulnerability. It's about acknowledging that we don't have it all figured out. And that's okay. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's the courage to say, I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust that I'll be okay. It's the willingness to step into the unknown, to take risks, and to open yourself up to new possibilities. When we let go of control, we make room for growth, for connection, and for the unexpected beauty of life. This process isn't easy. For many of us, the need for control is deeply ingrained, a habit we've carried for years. But with practice, we can learn to release the grip. We can learn to surrender, not in defeat, but in liberation. When we stop trying to control everything, we find a sense of peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. We realize that we are capable, resilient, and worthy no matter what life throws our way. In the end, letting go of control is not about losing power, it's about reclaiming your power. It's about recognizing that your worth is not tied to how perfectly you manage everything. It's about trusting that life has a rhythm of its own and that sometimes the most profound growth comes from leaning into uncertainty. So take a deep breath, loosen your grip, and let life flow. You might be surprised by what unfolds when you finally let go. Fear of vulnerability is one of the most common barriers to living an authentic, connected, and fulfilling life. At its core, vulnerability means exposing the parts of ourselves that feel most fragile, our emotions, fears, dreams, and imperfections. It's the act of standing in our truth, even when there's a risk of rejection, judgment, or failure. Vulnerability is raw, and it's uncomfortable. But it's uncomfortable. But it's also where courage, love, and connection are born. Yet for many of us, the fear of vulnerability keeps us locked in a cycle of avoidance, protection, and disconnection. This fear is deeply rooted in our need for safety and acceptance. We live in a world that often equates vulnerability with weakness. From a young age, we're taught to hide our tears, mask our insecurities, and put on a brave face. We learn that to be vulnerable is to invite criticism or ridicule. Over time, this belief becomes a defense mechanism. We build walls around our hearts and guard ourselves with perfectionism, humor, or indifference, hoping that by doing so, we can shield ourselves from pain. But in protecting ourselves from potential hurt, we also cut ourselves off from true connection and joy. The fear of vulnerability is often tied to shame, the belief that if people see the real us, they won't love or accept us. It's the voice in our heads that says, if they knew my struggles, they'd walk away, or if I open up, I'll be seen as weak. Shame thrives in secrecy, and it convinces us that hiding is safer than being seen. But what shame doesn't tell us is that hiding doesn't eliminate the fear, it amplifies it. The more we suppress our vulnerability, the more isolated we feel, and the more power fear gains over us. Vulnerability requires courage. It means stepping into uncertainty and trusting that we are enough, even if we stumble or fall. It's not about being fearless, it's about being brave enough to show up despite the fear. This bravery can take many forms, saying, I love you first, asking for help when you need it, admitting you don't have all the answers, or sharing a piece of your story that you've kept hidden. Each act of vulnerability chips away at the fear and brings us closer to authenticity. One of the greatest rewards of vulnerability is connection. As human beings, we are wired for connection, and vulnerability is the foundation of meaningful relationships. When we allow ourselves to be seen, truly seen, we invite others to do the same. It's in these moments of shared humanity that empathy, trust, and intimacy are born. Think about the people you feel closest to in your life. Chances are, those relationships are built on moments of vulnerability, confiding in a friend during a tough time, sharing your dreams with a partner, or admitting your fears to a mentor. Connection doesn't happen in the absence of vulnerability, it happens because of it. Letting go of the fear of vulnerability doesn't mean we need to bare our souls to everyone we meet. Vulnerability is not about oversharing, it's about discernment and intentionality. It's choosing to be open in spaces where trust and mutual respect exist. It's about recognizing that being vulnerable doesn't guarantee a specific outcome. There's always a risk involved, but understanding that the reward of living authentically far outweighs the discomfort of that risk. Overcoming the fear of vulnerability is a practice, not a one-time decision. It starts with small steps, acknowledging your emotions instead of suppressing them, sharing your thoughts with someone you trust, or simply admitting to yourself that it's okay not to have it all together. Each step builds confidence and reminds you that vulnerability is not a weakness but a strength. It takes strength to face your fears, to stand in your truth, and to open yourself up to the unknown. Self-compassion is a vital part of this journey. Often, the fear of vulnerability is tied to a harsh inner critic that tells us we're not good enough. Practicing self-compassion means treating ourselves with kindness when we feel exposed or uncertain. It's reminding ourselves that we are human, that everyone has fears and flaws, and that vulnerability is a universal experience. When we approach ourselves with gentleness, we create space for growth and resilience. Disappearing from the fear of vulnerability doesn't mean the fear goes away entirely. It means it no longer controls us. It means choosing courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, and connection over isolation. Vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, love, and joy. It's the key to living a life that feels real, not perfect. So take a deep breath, step into your truth, and let yourself be seen. In doing so, you'll discover that the freedom, connection, and fulfillment you've been searching for were waiting on the other side of fear all along. There is a profound freedom in disappearing into your true self, a version of you unburdened by expectations, roles, and societal labels. Yet for many of us, the idea of embracing our authentic selves feels elusive. We spend so much of our lives shaped by external influences, family, culture, peers, that it can be hard to discern where those influences end and where we truly begin. The journey to rediscovering and fully embodying your true self requires peeling back the layers of conditioning, releasing the masks you've worn, and reconnecting with your core essence. From the moment we are born, we are shaped by the world around us. We're taught what's acceptable and what isn't, how to behave, what to strive for, and who to be. These teachings aren't inherently bad. They often come from a place of love and care, but they can also overshadow our inner voice. Over time, we internalize these lessons, taking them as truth rather than perspective. We begin to measure ourselves against external standards of success, beauty, and worth, seeking validation from others instead of trusting our own intuition. Slowly but surely, we drift away from our authentic selves, becoming who we think we're supposed to be rather than who we truly are. The pressure to conform is immense. We wear different masks to fit into various roles: student, professional, parent, friend. In each role, we often prioritize what we think is expected over what feels true to us. While these adaptations can help us navigate social norms and responsibilities, they can also create a disconnect. We start to lose sight of our own desires, values, and dreams buried beneath the weight of external expectations. This disconnect can leave us feeling unfulfilled, even when outwardly everything seems fine. It's as though we're living someone else's life instead of our own. To disappear into your true self is not to abandon the roles you play or the responsibilities you hold. It's about aligning those roles with who you genuinely are. It's about stripping away the need for approval and the fear of judgment and choosing to live in alignment with your values, passions, and truth. This process begins with self-awareness. Take a moment to ask yourself, who am I when no one is watching? What brings me joy? Not because it's expected, but because it resonates deeply within me. What parts of myself have I silenced and why? The answers to these questions can illuminate the path back to your true self. Reconnecting with your authenticity requires courage. It's not always easy to face the parts of yourself you've hidden away, whether out of fear, shame, or doubt. But those parts, your quirks, your dreams, your vulnerabilities, are what make you whole. Embracing your true self means welcoming these aspects with compassion and understanding. It means giving yourself permission to be imperfect, to make mistakes, and to grow. It's not about reaching a fixed destination. It's about living in a way that feels honest and true in each moment. This journey often involves unlearning as much as it involves discovering. You may need to challenge beliefs that no longer serve you, question habits that feel misaligned, and release relationships or commitments that drain you. This process of shedding can feel unsettling, like stepping into the unknown. But in letting go of what isn't truly you, you create space for what is. You allow your inner voice, the one that knows your deepest truths, to guide you. One of the greatest gifts of disappearing into your true self is the sense of liberation it brings. When you stop trying to be what others expect, you free yourself from the burden of performance. You no longer need to pretend, impress, or conform. Instead, you can show up as you are, fully present, unapologetically real. This authenticity not only benefits you, but also enriches your relationships. When you live as your true self, you invite others to do the same. You create connections rooted in honesty and mutual understanding rather than pretense or obligation. Living as your true self also unlocks your creativity, passion, and purpose. When you align with your inner truth, you tap into a wellspring of energy and inspiration that fuels your pursuits. You're no longer held back by doubt or fear of failure because you're not striving to meet anyone else's standards. Instead, you're pursuing what genuinely matters to you. This kind of alignment brings a sense of fulfillment that external achievements alone can't provide. Disappearing into your true self is an act of trusting that who you are at your core is enough, and that living authentically will lead you to the connections, opportunities, and experiences that are meant for you. It's a journey of peeling back layers, listening to your inner voice, and stepping into the light of your own truth. In doing so, you'll find not only freedom, but also a profound sense of belonging to yourself, the most important connection of all.